1. The call. The city had been rinsed clean by a late winter squall, the kind that leaves Market Street glossy and the Bay Bridge cables humming like a bass string. From my window on the 4th floor, above a tailor who never smiled and a coffee place that smelled like scorched citrus, the financial district looked sharpened at the edges. San Francisco did that after rain. It pretended to be new again. My phone rang with a number that didn't belong to the Bay. I didn't answer on the first ring. Old habit. Let a caller prove they meant it. On the second, I picked up and heard a voice trying to stay calm by force of will. A man, mid-life, practiced hospitality tone cracking around something uglier. He introduced himself as the general manager of a hotel in Carmel-by-the-Sea. He said the words like he was placing a napkin on a table, gently, so no one saw the stain. "A situation at our bar," he said. "A guest nearly... We can't have it discussed. We need someone who understands discretion." I asked him why he wasn't calling the police. "We did," he said. "They're involved. But this guest is prominent. The guest is asking for you." That last part landed. Not a request from a hotel, a request from a guest. I kept my voice flat. "Name? Ronan Hale." I knew it. Not personally, but the name had floated through the city's tech news the way smoke moves under a door. Ronan Hale, once a high-level executive at one of the big companies that pretended it wasn't a monopoly because it had an avocado-colored logo. He'd left with the kind of severance that buys silence and a sense of moral cleanliness. Then he'd started something that drew money like a magnet draws filings. His new outfit, WordWorks, if the articles had it right, was building AI tooling to design and manufacture small robotics in volume, not humanoid showpieces for conference stages, not vacuum cleaners with delusions, smaller, dense, fast. The kind of machines that disappear into supply chains, warehouses, water pipes, medical kits. The kind of machines that change power without asking permission. The hotel manager said, "Mr. Hale keeps a private liquor locker in our bar. Someone tampered with it. Someone put poison in his bottle." Poison made the room feel tighter. "What bottle?" I asked. "Jack Daniels," he said, and the way he said it carried embarrassment like he'd hoped the threat would arrive in something more sophisticated. I asked when it happened. "Last night, a friend of his noticed before Mr. Hale drank." A friend. A saved life. A drama with its own built-in hero. I asked where in Carmel. He told me the hotel's name. It sat a few blocks above Ocean Avenue, close enough to smell the ocean when the wind leaned the right way, far enough to feel insulated from it. A place that catered to people who carried privacy as a personal brand. He said, "Mr. Hale will cover your fee." I said, "I'll be there before dark." After I hung up, I stood with my hand on the phone for a moment, feeling the aftertaste of the word poison in my mouth. San Francisco had plenty of ways to die that looked like accidents. Carmel, from a distance, looked like a place where death wore a softer suit. I packed light. Notebook, small camera, a lock pick set I rarely used and never admitted to owning, nitrile gloves, and a coat that didn't scream city. I locked my office, walked down the stairs, and stepped into air that smelled like wet concrete and salt. On the way to my car, I caught myself thinking about those liquor lockers. I'd seen them before in places that wanted to feel like a club without having to say the word. Little wooden doors behind a bar, brass plates engraved with names, a way to turn a bottle into a territory. A bottle, sabotaged, was a message you could hold in your hand. And it meant someone had been close. 2, southbound. I took 280 out of the city instead of 101. It's a prettier line, and on days like that, pretty mattered. Hills rolled under a low ceiling of cloud, green like bruised velvet. The radio couldn't decide whether to talk about AI regulation or celebrity divorces, so I shut it off. The farther south I drove, the more the landscape changed its posture. The peninsula's clean edges gave way to Monterey County's patchwork of fields. Artichoke rows near Castroville sat like disciplined troops. The smell of soil came through the vents, even with the windows up. By the time Highway 1 swung toward the coast, the light had thinned into that coastal gray that makes even expensive cars look tired. I passed turnoffs to beaches where surfers stood in black wetsuits like punctuation marks against white water. I passed stands selling strawberries under hand-painted signs. I passed cypress trees twisted by wind into shapes that looked like they'd been sculpted in anger. Carmel didn't announce itself with neon. It never had. That was the point. No billboards, no streetlights, no addresses on most homes. A town that seemed to insist it had been built for people who didn't want to be found. I rolled in along a narrow road lined with hedges and cottages that looked like they'd been designed by someone who feared straight lines. Roof lines dipped, chimneys leaned, gardens spilled over low stone walls. The whole place carried an intentional storybook feeling, but there was money under it, hidden like a knife in a sleeve. I found the hotel without much trouble. The entrance was discreet, a drive that curved just enough to keep the lobby from being visible from the street. Valet stand, soft lighting. A bellman with the posture of someone trained not to appear curious. Inside, the lobby held the kind of quiet that costs money. A fireplace. Books arranged as decor, not as evidence of reading. Art on the walls that nodded at Carmel's gallery history without committing to anything challenging. Through tall windows I could see the garden, trimmed hedges, stone paths, an old Monterey pine leaning as if listening. The manager met me with a smile that felt bolted on. He had a neat beard and eyes that did too much work. He led me past the lobby into the bar. The bar sat half sunk into the building, designed to feel hidden even when full. Dark wood. Leather stools with patina that had been manufactured, not earned. A long mirror behind the bottles that made the room look deeper than it was. A fireplace at one end, gas flames moving with stagecraft. And behind the bar, set into the wood like a reliquary, were the liquor lockers. They ran in a grid, maybe 50, each a small door with a brass plaque, names etched in serif fonts. Some were initials, some were full names that sounded like trusts and law firms. Each door had a tiny keyhole. Each door had the weight of private ritual. I stood and looked at them longer than was polite. The manager let me. "You can see why we don't advertise them," he said. "They advertise themselves," I said. He swallowed. "Mr. Hale is in his suite. He asked that you look here first." A bartender watched us from the far end, polishing a glass that didn't need it. A couple sat near the fireplace, too well dressed to be locals, speaking in low voices that stayed on their own side of the room. The bar smelled of oak and citrus peels and whatever cologne expensive men used when they wanted to smell like clean rather than like scent. I walked behind the bar with the manager's permission. The bartender's gaze followed me, steady, not hostile, just alert. In a place like Carmel, people didn't expect crime. They expected inconvenience. That made them cling to control when something ugly arrived. The manager stopped at a locker on the second row. Locker 37. The brass plate read, "Ronan Hale." The manager handed me a key on a small ring. "This is our key," he said. "The guest has his own." "Who else has access?" I asked. He hesitated. "We have a master key. It's kept in the office safe. 2 managers have the code. And the bar supervisor has the code. We're careful." Careful is what people say when they mean we've never been tested. I didn't open it yet. I looked at the lock first. The keyhole's brass rim had a faint scuff, barely visible, but not the kind that comes from ordinary use. The wood around the lock had a hairline scrape, as if something thin and hard had kissed it. Not a splintered break, not force, something patient. "Has anyone photographed this?" I asked. The manager shook his head. I took out my phone and shot several angles, then snapped the bartender into the frame with his consent, the manager's hands, the position of the locker relative to the bottles. Evidence doesn't only live in what happened, it lives in where everyone stood afterward. Then I put on gloves. The night trial snapped softly in the warm bar air, a sound that made the bartender's jaw tighten. I inserted the key, turned it, and opened the locker. Inside sat a single bottle of Jack Daniels, dark glass, familiar label, a black cap. Beside it was a short tumbler, upside down on a coaster, untouched. There was also a folded napkin with a small ink note written in neat hand. "For when the weekends." I didn't touch the bottle. Not yet. I leaned close and looked for the kind of details most people never see. The label sat straight. The cap looked sealed. The glass had no obvious residue, but under the label's lower edge, near the seam, there was a tiny distortion, like someone had pressed a fingernail into it and smoothed it back. A pinprick, so small it could be dismissed as manufacturing error if you wanted to sleep at night. I stepped back, shut the locker, and exhaled slowly. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a random act by a drunk tourist. This was personal or professional. Sometimes those words mean the same thing. 3. The first sip. Ronan Hale's suite sat on the top floor facing the direction of the ocean, though the view was mostly trees and the suggestion of water beyond them. The hallway carpet muted my footsteps. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus, pumped through vents like a calming drug. A security man stood outside the door, dressed like a tourist and failing. He nodded me in. Hale opened the door himself. He looked younger than his press photos, but not in a good way. The photos had been lit for optimism. Here, under hotel lamps, his face showed the cost of speed, small lines near the eyes, a tension at the mouth, the kind of thinness that comes from eating meetings instead of food. He offered his hand. His grip was strong, practiced, the hand of someone who shook hands as a strategy. "I appreciate you coming," he said. His voice carried a touch of fatigue, but no panic. Panic is messy. Executives learn to keep their fear behind glass. I stepped inside. The suite carried expensive restraint, pale wood, linen, art that looked like it had been chosen by a committee. A tray of untouched fruit sat on a table like an accusation. Another man sat near the window. He stood when I entered, polite, almost deferential. Mid-40s, hair cut close, beard kept tidy. His clothes were casual in a way that cost money. He watched me with a steadiness that felt familiar. Not a civilian's curiosity, more like someone used to rooms where decisions happened. "That's Miles," Hale said. "Miles Granger." Granger nodded. "You're Reyes." I didn't ask how he knew. Carmel was small. News traveled through money faster than through mouths. Hale gestured to a chair. "They told me what you do, that you don't make noise." "I make the right kind," I said. He almost smiled at that, then dropped it. "Tell me what happened," I said. Hale sat, leaned forward, and folded his hands as if he was about to pitch a product. "Last night," he said, "I asked Miles to meet me at the bar. I'm here because Carmel is quieter than the city. Fewer eyes. I stay here often. The bar has a locker program. They keep my bottle. It's stupid, I know, but it's also a ritual, a constant." "Jack Daniels," I said. "It's not just any bottle," he said, and there it was. A flicker of pride that annoyed me until I remembered how people cling to small preferences when bigger parts of their lives are unstable. "It's a particular single-barrel selection from years ago. A friend gave it to me when I left my last company." He looked toward Granger briefly. The friend who gave it wasn't in the room. Granger spoke without being asked, as if he'd rehearsed the words in his head until they were smooth. "He poured," Granger said. "He was about to drink. I took a sip first. Habit." "Why?" I asked. Granger's eyes didn't flinch. "Because I'm a snob about it, because Jack has a profile. You know when it's wrong." "Wrong how?" I asked. He paused, choosing language that would satisfy without revealing too much. "Off. Metallic. A bitterness that didn't belong. Not barrel, not char. Something sharp." Hale's jaw tightened. I watched him. His face changed. I asked what was wrong. He told me not to drink. Granger nodded once. I said it fast. "Did he swallow?" I asked. Granger shook his head. "Barely. It hit my tongue, I knew. I spit it out. I rinsed. The bartender called someone. Then the police came. Then—" He stopped, because the rest of that story had been chaos. Hale's fingers pressed together hard enough to whiten. "I've been threatened," Hale said. "Not directly. The way it happens in my world, lawsuits, smears, anonymous concerned emails. People asking about my family. But this—" He looked away. "This is different. Someone wanted a clean end." "Who knew you'd be at that bar?" I asked. He shrugged. "Anyone who follows me. Anyone who knows my habits. Anyone close enough to know I keep a bottle there." His eyes met mine. "Anyone who has access." I let the silence stretch. A good silence makes people fill it. He finally said, "I didn't call you because I'm scared." I waited. He continued, "I called you because if this gets out, it becomes a story. And stories get used. Investors get spooked. Partners get cold feet. Competitors get leverage. I want the person who did it found, quietly." "Quietly isn't always possible," I said. "I know," he said, "but try." I turned to Granger. "And you? Why are you here?" Granger's mouth tightened, almost a smile. "Because I was there. Because I don't like being near poison and then going home without answers." His gaze shifted toward Hale, then back. "Because Ronan isn't good at seeing threats that don't arrive on a calendar invite." Hale didn't argue. That told me more than his biography ever would. I took out my notebook. "Tell me about WordWorks," I said. Hale exhaled. "Of course." He spoke like a man who'd had to explain the same thing to investors who wanted magic without risk. "We build models that design machines," he said. "Not drawings, not renderings, actual manufacturing plans. We can generate and validate millions of micro-variations of a mechanism in hours. Then we use a manufacturing stack that turns that design into physical units at scale without a traditional robotics line." "Small robots," I said. "Small enough to be everywhere," he said. "Inspection, repair, medical, logistics, agriculture. And military," I said. His eyes narrowed. "We don't build weapons. You build a platform," I said. "Platforms get used." He didn't answer. A non-answer counts. I watched him carefully. Fear shows in the gaps between words. Hale's fear lived in his focus, in the way he kept trying to narrow the conversation to the parts he could control. I closed the notebook. "I'll start at the bar," I said. "I'll want a list of anyone with access to the locker master key. I'll want staff schedules. I'll want any security footage. I'll want your calendar. I'll want your recent communications, at least the relevant ones." He nodded with the mechanical obedience of someone used to due diligence. As I stood, he said, "Reyes." "Yes?" He looked at me, eyes steady now, and said, "I don't want you to protect me. I want you to tell me the truth." I held his gaze. "Truth isn't gentle," I said. "I'm not asking for gentle," he said. That was the first thing he said that sounded fully human. 4. Brass and wood. Back at the bar, the afternoon light slanted through the windows in a thin sheet. Carmel's sun rarely arrived like a celebration. It showed up like a reluctant guest. The bartender introduced himself as Teo. His hands kept moving, wiping, stacking, arranging. A man who made order because disorder made him nervous. The bar supervisor, Lydia, joined us. She had the kind of composed face that makes people hand over their problems without realizing it. Early 50s, hair pinned back, tailored black blazer. Her eyes held that practiced warmth people in luxury hospitality cultivate. The warmth that never gives up control. She said she'd been with the hotel long enough to remember when Carmel still felt like an artist's village more than a curated postcard. I asked about the liquor lockers. Lydia explained the system. Each patron had a key. The bar had a matching key. The master key existed for emergencies, a lost patron key, a stuck lock, a bottle left too long. The master key stayed in a safe in the manager's office. 2 managers had the code. Lydia had the code. The bar staff did not. "Then how does a patron access their bottle?" I asked. "They ask us," Lydia said. "We open it. We pour. The bottle stays in the locker. Some patrons prefer that. It keeps things managed. Managed. Controlled. Like an operating room." "Was that always the case?" I asked. Lydia's gaze held. "Yes." I had heard that word already. A lot of yeses usually hide a no. I asked to see the office safe and the key logs. The manager led me upstairs. In a small back office that smelled like toner and lavender air freshener, he opened a steel safe behind a painting of a shoreline. Inside sat envelopes, petty cash, and a single key ring on a hook, a brass master key polished by use with a tiny tag. I asked who had used it recently. He said no one, not that I know of. I asked for the safe access logs. The hotel used a modern keypad safe that tracked entries. The manager hesitated again, then typed something into a computer. He printed a sheet. It showed dates, times, and codes entered. 3 entries in the last week. One was his, one was Lydia's, one was the assistant manager's. The third entry's time was the day before the poisoning, late afternoon. The assistant manager's code had been used. "Where is your assistant manager?" I asked. The manager's lips thinned. "On leave." "Why?" I asked. He glanced toward the closed door as if the walls might be listening. "Personal reasons." I nodded as if I accepted it, then asked the next question without pause. "What are her personal reasons exactly?" He blinked. He stopped, then chose a safer phrasing. "She has been dealing with stress. Stress can mean grief. Stress can mean addiction. Stress can mean someone got caught." I asked for her name. "Erin," he said. "Erin Malloy." I asked for her address, phone number, employee file. His discomfort sharpened into resentment. I was pulling on the hotel's internal seams, and hotels don't like their seams touched. "Mr. Hale is paying for this," I said softly, "and if you want this to remain quiet, you cooperate." He handed me a folder. I left the office with copies of the keylog and Erin Malloy's file. Erin had started 6 months ago, came from a resort in Napa, had good references, no criminal record. She lived in Monterey. Her emergency contact was a sister in Sacramento. On paper, she looked normal. Normal people poison whiskey bottles all the time, if you believe crime shows. Back in the bar, I asked to see security footage. Theo and Lydia exchanged a glance. The manager said the bar had cameras, but they were there for inventory and safety. He said footage wasn't kept long. He said the angles didn't cover behind the lockers directly. Privacy concerns, of course. We watched what they had. A fixed camera showed the bar from a corner angle. I saw staff moving, guests arriving and leaving, Lydia opening lockers now and then. It was boring footage, the kind that makes you forget to look. I didn't forget. At 3:14 p.m. the day before the poisoning, Lydia stepped behind the bar with her phone. She opened the locker area, not 37, but another locker. She did something with her hands, then closed it. She walked away. At 3:22 p.m., a man in a grey hoodie, someone's staff might not look at twice, slipped behind the bar when no one was watching. He moved quickly, crouched near the lockers, then stood and left. The camera caught only his profile, a baseball cap, a beard. The manager leaned in. "That's not staff." "No," I said. "That's someone who knows how to move in a space like he belongs." I rewound. Watched again. The man's hands moved with precision. No fumbling. He touched one locker, hard to tell which from the angle, and he was gone in under 10 seconds. "Who was that?" I asked. Theo frowned. "I don't know." Lydia's voice stayed calm. "Guests don't come behind the bar." "But he did," I said. She didn't contradict me. She didn't look surprised either. That was the part that stuck. "Pull the guest list," I said. "Anyone who checked in that day, anyone at the bar that afternoon, and I want the locksmith, whoever installed these lockers." Lydia arched an eyebrow. "Locksmith?" "Locks aren't magic," I said. "They're just promises. Someone broke one." I returned to the locker and studied the wood again. The scrape around the keyhole could have been from a thin tool, or from a copied key that didn't fit perfectly. Key duplication. In a town with no street addresses, it would still leave a trail. I asked Theo about Erin Malloy. He shrugged. "She doesn't work the bar." I asked Lydia. She paused. "Erin had access to the office. She had the safe code. She stopped herself. She was trusted." "Was she in the bar yesterday?" I asked. Lydia answered quickly. "No." Too quickly. I filed that away. Then I asked the question I didn't want to ask yet. "Do you know Miles Granger?" I said. Theo looked blank. Lydia shook her head. The manager said, "He's with Mr. Hale. He was here last night, yes, but before that, I'm not sure." I nodded as if it didn't matter. It mattered. Because the hero is always the first person you stop suspecting. And I had learned, over time, that safety is often staged. V. Carmel's quiet teeth. I walked out of the hotel and into Carmel's afternoon. The town looked gentle. That was its trick. Carmel had built its economy on softness. Cottages, galleries, tasting rooms, restaurants with menus written like poems. People came to Carmel to pretend the world wasn't loud. They came for the beach where dogs ran without leashes, for the white sand that squeaked underfoot, for sunsets that turned the Pacific into molten copper. I walked down toward Ocean Avenue. Shops lined the street, art glass, handmade jewelry, sweaters folded like offerings. People moved slowly, as if speed would be impolite. I passed a bakery with warm sugar air spilling out. I passed a gallery showing abstract canvases that looked like weather. I passed a courtyard where a fountain ticked softly, the sound designed to fill silence without disturbing it. At the end of Ocean Avenue, the land dropped and the ocean opened like a page. Carmel Beach stretched wide and pale. The waves came in with their own patience. Dogs chased each other in spirals, their owners calling names that sounded like old money and old novels. The wind carried salt and kelp and something faintly metallic. I stood at the edge of the sand and let the cold air clear my head. Someone had chosen Carmel for this act because Carmel felt safe. Because a poisoning in a hotel bar in Carmel carried a different story than one in San Francisco. Here it felt like a violation. In the city, it would just be Tuesday. I took out my phone and searched for locksmiths in Carmel and nearby. There were only a few. I chose one with a plain name and no flashy website, the kind of place that survived on locals, not tourists. The shop sat in a low building near Carmel Valley Road, more utilitarian than the village center. Inside, keys hung on pegboards, and the air smelled of brass shavings and oil. A bell rang when I entered. An older man looked up from behind a counter. He had hands like worn leather and eyes that measured people quickly. I showed my badge, not official anymore, but still persuasive, and explained why I was there without giving the entire story. He listened, then asked, "Those lockers? At the hotel?" "Yes," I said. He nodded. "We service them, not often. They're simple, but they're old. Wood swells, locks stick." "Have you cut keys for them recently?" I asked. He squinted, thinking. "Maybe." "Maybe isn't helpful," I said. He leaned back, reached under the counter and pulled out a logbook. Old-school paper, names, dates, the kind of record that existed because he didn't trust computers. He flipped pages with slow care. "Here," he said, tapping a line. 2 weeks ago. Key duplication. Locker key." "What name?" I asked. He slid the book toward me. The name written wasn't Ronan Hales. It was Miles Granger. The date matched Hale's stay schedule from the hotel's records. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "Did he show you the original key?" I asked. The locksmith nodded. "Yes, needed it to cut a copy." "Did you ask why?" I asked. He shrugged. "People lose keys, people like backups." "What did the key tag say?" I asked. He leaned closer. It had a number, 37. I felt a small, sharp click in my mind, like a lock turning. Granger had a key to Hale's locker, meaning either Hale gave it to him, or Granger obtained it some other way. Either way, he could open the locker without the bar staff. He could do it quietly. He could do it at any hour if he knew when the bar was empty. He could also stage a rescue. I thanked the locksmith and left. Outside, the sky had flattened into a solid sheet of grey. The wind had picked up. Carmel's softness suddenly looked like a mask. I walked back toward the hotel slowly, letting the information settle. I didn't want the hero to become the villain. That felt too neat, too easy. Life rarely wraps itself into symmetry. But keys have a way of telling the truth. They don't care about narrative. As I crossed Ocean Avenue, I passed a couple standing outside a wine tasting room, laughing at something private. Their laughter bounced off stone walls and disappeared into the sea air. For a moment, I envied them. Then I remembered that someone, somewhere, had chosen poison as a solution, and I kept walking at 6, the founder in the glass. Back in the suite, Hale looked up as I entered. Granger was there again, leaning against the window frame, hands in pockets. He watched me like he was reading my face for headlines. I didn't show him anything. I sat, opened my notebook, and asked Hale questions about his locker key. "Do you still have it?" I asked. Hale nodded, reached into a drawer, and produced a small ring with a single key. It looked identical to the bar's copy. Have you ever given it to anyone? I asked. He frowned. No. Never? I pressed. He hesitated, then said, once. To Miles, months ago. We were here together. I left my key upstairs. He wanted another drink. I told him where it was. Granger didn't move. I asked, did you get it back? Hale nodded slowly. Yes. Are you sure? I asked. His eyes narrowed, the executive anger flickering. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting, I said. I'm asking questions. Hale looked toward Granger, searching for confirmation. Granger's expression stayed neutral, but his jaw held tension. I turned to Granger. Did you make a copy of his locker key? I asked. A pause, just long enough to tell me he'd considered lying. Then he said, yes. Hale's head snapped toward him. Why? Granger's voice stayed even. Because you lose things. Because you travel. Because you forget. Because if you call me and tell me you're stuck, I want to help. Hale looked stunned, then annoyed, then uneasy. You didn't tell me. Granger shrugged. It didn't feel like a big deal. A small, controlled motion. The kind a man makes when he's practiced at minimizing. I wrote it down anyway. Not because I needed it. Because the act of writing makes the room take it seriously. Where is that copy now? I asked. Granger didn't answer immediately. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a key ring and held it up. A single key. Small tag, 37. I didn't think this would matter, he said. Hale stared at it as if it had turned into something alive. I leaned forward. When did you last use it? I asked. Granger's eyes held mine. Not since last night. Before last night, I said. He inhaled, then said, a few days ago, I checked the bottle. Ronan asked me to. He was traveling. He wanted to know it was still there. Hale looked at me, then back at Granger. I didn't ask you that. No. Granger's face didn't shift much, but something in his posture tightened. Maybe you didn't, he said. Maybe I did it because I knew you'd forget. That was the moment the room changed. Because what he said sounded plausible, but the details didn't fit the way Hale's mind worked. Hale forgot things, yes, but he didn't outsource control lightly. He had built a company around control. Let's step back, I said. Tell me about your relationship. Hale spoke first, as if to reclaim his narrative. Miles and I met 15 years ago, he said. We were both in the valley. We both survived. He's been my friend since before I had a name that got published. Granger nodded, eyes on the ocean. What does he do? I asked. Hale said, finance, strategy. He's good at seeing the angles. Granger's mouth tightened. The compliment had a blade hidden in it. Is he involved with WordWorks? I asked. Hale hesitated. Not officially. Granger said, I advise. Paid? I asked. Granger said, sometimes. Equity? I asked. Granger didn't answer. Hale said, he has some. I wrote it down. Equity changes friendship. It changes loyalty. It changes the way people talk about helping. I asked Hale about recent conflicts. He listed them the way you list weather, inevitable, constant. A competitor filed a patent challenge, he said. A former colleague tried to recruit our head of manufacturing. An investor threatened to pull out unless we pivoted toward defense contracts. A reporter started asking questions about our supply chain. Names, I said. He gave them. Most were predictable. Venture firms with founders who wrote essays about ethics while funding whatever made money. Hardware competitors. A defense contractor with a clean website and a history no one talked about. An ex-executive with a bruised ego. Then I asked about personal life. Hale's eyes shifted toward the fruit tray as if it might rescue him. I don't have much of one, he said. I didn't believe him. People always have something they're hiding. Sometimes it's love. Sometimes it's shame. Sometimes it's a plan. I asked about Carmel. Why here? But he said, it's quiet. I waited. He added, and I can meet people without it looking like a meeting. Carmel was full of meetings disguised as leisure. That was what made it valuable. I asked, who were you meeting? He looked at Granger, then back. A potential manufacturing partner, based in Monterey, and an investor who has a place in Pebble Beach. Names. I said. He gave them. I asked Granger if he'd met any of them. Granger said, no. I watched him. The lie wasn't obvious. It was practiced. That made it worse. I stood, closed the notebook and said, I want your phones, both of you, for an hour. I'll return them. I'll look at relevant communications only. Hale nodded without enthusiasm but without refusal. Granger hesitated, then handed his over too. As I scrolled through messages, I kept my face steady. The trick with phones isn't finding a confession. It's finding what's missing. Hale's phone was full of investor calendars, encrypted chats, supply chain calls. A life built out of logistics. Granger's phone held fewer messages than it should have, too clean, like a room staged for sale. The call. Then I saw it. A message thread with a number saved under a bland name, M. The messages were short, coded, but the pattern was clear. Meeting times, locations, phrases like, keep him steady and pressure builds compliance. I didn't need to decode everything. I'd spent enough years watching people maneuver around truth. The last message, sent the afternoon before the poisoning, read, tonight, bar. He'll be there. We need the scare. I looked up slowly. Granger met my eyes. He didn't blink. In that moment, I understood something that had nothing to do with whiskey. This wasn't an attempt to kill Ronan Hale for the satisfaction of ending him. This was an attempt to change him. Fear is leverage. Poison is a negotiation tactic if you think you can control the dose, control the moment, control the rescue. And the man who saves you becomes the man you trust. I handed the phone back without comment. Hale watched the exchange, confused, then uneasy. I need to speak with the bar supervisor again, I said. Granger said, why? I have questions, I said. He nodded, as if granting permission. I left the suite with my mind sharper than it had been all day. Carmel's fog pressed against the windows like a hand. Somewhere in the hotel, a lock waited to be turned again. 7. The system that pretends to be a club. Lydia met me in the bar's back hallway, away from guests. She smelled faintly of bergamot and something herbal, expensive calm. I asked her directly, has Miles Granger been behind your bar before? She frowned. Not that I recall. I held my gaze on her until the recall arrived. Her eyes shifted slightly, not to the side, but inward, as if she was searching her own memory for something she'd trained herself to ignore. Then she said, he has been here when Mr. Hale is here. He's confident. Confident enough to step behind the bar? I asked. She hesitated, then said, once, months ago. Mr. Hale wanted something from his locker and had stepped away. Mr. Granger tried to be helpful. I corrected him. Did you report it? I asked. We're not in the business of reporting guests for stepping in the wrong place, she said. But you remembered it, I said. She sighed. Yes, because it was unusual. Did he have a key? I asked. She looked at me more sharply now. I didn't see one. I asked about Erin Malloy's leave. Lydia's face tightened. Erin made mistakes. What kind? I asked. She was seen in staff areas she didn't belong, Lydia said. She was late. She stopped, then chose another route. She had a personal issue. What issue? I asked. Lydia didn't answer. I leaned closer. Someone used her code to open the safe, the day before the poisoning. Either she did it, or someone used her code. Lydia's eyes hardened. Are you accusing Erin? I'm tracking the key, I said. That's all. She held my gaze, then said quietly, Erin was seeing someone, a guest. That's against policy. A guest like Miles Granger? I asked. Lydia's mouth tightened. That's not what I said, she replied. But she didn't deny it either. I asked if Erin had worked the day the safe was opened. Yes, Lydia said. She came in. She left early. Said she was sick. I asked if she'd been in the bar. Lydia looked away for a fraction of a second. Not officially. Unofficially, I said. She walked through, Lydia admitted. She spoke to Theo. What about? I asked. Her schedule, Lydia said. Or so she said. I asked Theo separately. He was jumpy now. The kind of jumpy that comes from realizing you've been standing near a bomb without knowing it. Theo told me Erin had asked him if he'd ever tasted something that didn't belong in a drink. She asked that, I said. He nodded. She was nervous. I thought she was talking about a bad bottle. Did she mention Jack Daniels? I asked. He shook his head. No. That made my skin crawl, because if she was involved, she was already framing the narrative. Something wrong with a bottle, an accident, a quality issue. A poisoner who wants to stay invisible always leaves room for plausible explanations. I asked the manager for Erin Malloy's contact information again. Then I left the hotel and drove to Monterey. Her address led to an apartment complex near a strip of low shops. Parking lot lined with sedans, a place built for people who worked for the tourist industry but didn't share in its shine. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I stood in the hallway listening. Nothing inside except the faint hum of an appliance. I went back to my car and waited. Waiting is part of the job. It's where most of the work happens. Watching patterns, watching who arrives, watching who doesn't. After 40 minutes, a woman walked toward the building carrying groceries. She wore a hoodie and dark jeans, hair pulled into a hurried bun. Her face was pale, eyes shadowed. She froze when she saw me by the door. "Erin Malloy?" I asked. She didn't answer, but her grip tightened on the grocery bag. "I'm not here to arrest you," I said. "I'm here to ask what you know." She looked like she might run. Then she looked like she might cry. That second look was worse. Running is simple. Crying means a person's inner story has collapsed. "I didn't do it," she said, voice thin. "I didn't say you did," I replied. She laughed once, sharp and bitter. "Everyone thinks I did." "Do you know Miles Granger?" I asked. Her eyes flicked up. The name hit. "Yes," she said. "Were you seeing him?" I asked. She swallowed. It wasn't like that." That was the line of someone who knew it was exactly like that. "Did he ask you for the safe code?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "No." "Did he know it?" I asked. She hesitated. "He saw me enter it once." "Accidentally?" I asked. She looked down. He was in the office. He said he was looking for Mr. Hale. The manager wasn't around. He talked to me. I didn't think—" "People who don't want you to think are skilled at it," I said. Her eyes glistened. "I'm not stupid." "I didn't call you that," I said. I asked her about the day the safe was opened. She said she hadn't opened it. She said she'd been in the office, yes, but she hadn't taken the master key. She said she'd left early because she felt sick, because she'd found something in the bar that made her stomach turn. "What did you find?" I asked. She looked away, then said, "A small bottle, not liquor. Something chemical, in the trash under the bar." My spine stiffened. "Did you take it?" She shook her head. "No, I panicked. I left it. I told Theo. He said he'd handle it." Theo, the bartender, had not mentioned this. I asked Erin why she didn't report it to Lydia or the manager. Erin's laugh came again, smaller this time. "Because it would have meant I was digging in trash under the bar, because it would have meant I was involved, because it would have meant—" She stopped, breath catching. "Because Miles told me not to." There it was. "Why would he tell you that?" I asked. Erin's eyes filled. "He said it was nothing. He said it was a supplement. He said I was being dramatic." "What did it look like?" I asked. She described a small dark vial, unlabeled. A dropper cap, the kind sold for wellness, or the kind used for something else entirely. "Where is Theo now?" I asked. "At the hotel," she said. I nodded. "I'll speak to him." As I left, Erin said softly, "Miles isn't who he pretends." I looked back at her. She added, "He makes people feel like they're saving him, and then he owns them." I drove back to Carmel with that sentence in my head. In the rearview mirror, Monterey's practical buildings shrank. Ahead, Carmel's storybook silhouette waited. And somewhere inside that hotel, a man named Miles Granger was wearing heroism like a tailored coat. 8. Word works, swarm logic, and the soft violence of ambition. Night came early on the coast. By the time I reached Carmel again, the sky had darkened into a thick grey blue, and fog slid between trees like smoke. The bar was busier now. A pianist played softly in a corner, the kind of music designed to fill space without interrupting conversation. Guests in wool and cashmere leaned close over cocktails, talking about art, about golf, about nothing important. Theo worked behind the bar, expression tight. Lydia watched the room like a captain watching a ship in rough water. I asked Theo to step into the back hall again. His hands trembled slightly as he dried them on a towel. "Erin told me about a vial," I said. Theo's eyes widened, then narrowed. "She talked to you?" "Yes," I said. "She said she found it under the bar. She said she told you. She said you handled it." Theo swallowed. "I threw it away." "Where?" I asked. He looked trapped. "Outside. Dumpster." "Tonight?" I asked. He shook his head. "That day." "Why didn't you tell Lydia?" I asked. He rubbed his forehead. "Because it looked like it could be anything. Because Erin was already in trouble. Because I didn't want drama." "And because Miles Granger told you not to," I said. Theo's eyes flicked up, startled. That was enough. He whispered, "He said it would ruin Mr. Hale. He said it would make it look like Mr. Hale was involved. Drugs. Some scandal." "Did you believe him?" I asked. Theo's shoulders slumped. "I didn't want to decide." I nodded. Indecision becomes a decision anyway. I left Theo with his guilt and went to Hale's suite again. Security let me in without fuss now, as if the hotel had accepted that I was part of the furniture. Hale stood near the window. The ocean beyond was invisible in fog. Granger sat on the couch, legs crossed, calm as a man reading a menu. Hale looked at my face and understood something had shifted. "What?" he asked. I didn't answer him first. I asked him a question. "Tell me exactly what your company does," I said. "Not the pitch, the truth." Hale stiffened. "Why?" "Because I want to know what kind of enemies you can make," I said. "Real ones." He glanced at Granger. Granger's expression stayed neutral, but his eyes tightened. He wanted control of this conversation. He wanted to steer it back toward outsiders. Hale exhaled. "We have a model stack," he said. "Design models that generate mechanisms, simulation models that test them in digital environments, then production models that translate designs into fabrication instructions. We're building a pipeline that makes robotics manufacturing fast, modular, cheap." "Cheap enough to make swarms," I said. Hale's mouth tightened. "Swarms is a loaded word." "Loaded words are still words," I said. He continued, voice a touch strained. "We call them micro-units. They can be used individually or in groups. Inspection bots, repair bots, medical delivery." "Or surveillance," I said, "or sabotage." Hale looked at me with anger now. "I'm not building that." "Intent doesn't control outcome," I said. His hands clenched. "People always assume the worst because it's easier than imagining nuance." Granger spoke softly, a calm injection. "Ronan is careful. We've been careful." "We." The word landed like a fingerprint. I turned toward Granger. "Who is we?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "People who want Ronan to succeed." I didn't match the smile. "I spoke to Erin Malloy," I said. Granger's posture didn't change, but I saw a small tightening around his eyes. Hale frowned. "Erin?" "The assistant manager," I said. "The one on leave." Hale looked confused. Granger looked composed. "She told me you were in the office," I said to Granger. "She told me you watched her enter the safe code." Granger shrugged. "I'm a guest. I walk around." "She told me you told her not to report a vial found under the bar," I said. Hale's head snapped toward Granger. "What vial?" Granger's face stayed calm, but his voice cooled. "This is nonsense." I sat, leaned forward, and spoke quietly. "Miles," I said, "you made a copy of Ronan's locker key." Hale's eyes widened. "What?" Granger didn't deny it. He'd already admitted it earlier. He said, "It was for emergencies." I saw your messages, I said. The ones about the scare. Hale froze. Granger's gaze didn't flinch. You violated my privacy. I nodded. I did. It was relevant. Hale's voice came out strained. Miles, what is he talking about? Granger turned to Hale with practiced gentleness, the tone of a man soothing a child. Ronan, he said, he's seeing patterns because that's his job, but he doesn't understand context. Then give it, I said. Granger looked at me. Fine, context. Ronan has enemies. We've been monitoring threats. We've been discussing security. I told someone we needed to make him take it seriously. That's all. Who? I asked. Granger's smile vanished. I don't have to answer you. No, I agreed. You don't. But your silence will answer anyway. Hale stood abruptly, pacing near the window. The suite's calm decor couldn't hold his agitation. He ran a hand through his hair, then stopped. Miles, he said, voice tight. Did you do something? Granger's gaze softened again. Ronan, don't. Hale turned toward him, eyes bright with anger and betrayal. Did you put something in my bottle? Granger's face held calm, but now there was something else behind it. A tiredness, an irritation at being forced into the open. No, he said. A clean lie. Too clean. I said you didn't put it in to kill him. Hale looked at me sharply. Granger's eyes narrowed. I continued, you put it in to control him. You expected to stop him before he drank. You expected to play hero. You expected to make him afraid enough to follow your plan. Hale's mouth opened slightly, as if he couldn't find language for the idea. Granger's voice dropped. That's an accusation. It's an analysis, I said. Hale whispered, Miles. Granger stood, moved slowly, palms open, calm theatrics. Ronan, listen. He's spinning stories. Someone wanted you dead. Someone out there, a competitor, a fanatic. This detective wants to feel clever. Hale looked torn, and the sight made me angry. Not at him, at the mechanism of it, at how easily trust becomes a weapon. I said, Erin described a vial. Theo confirmed it. You told them to keep quiet. That vial didn't belong under the bar. It belonged in your pocket. Granger's face hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. I stood too. Then show me your pockets. For a moment, the room held its breath. Granger didn't move. Hale's voice cracked. Miles just... Granger's eyes flicked toward Hale, then toward the door. A quick calculation. Exit routes, witnesses. He wasn't trapped yet. He was deciding whether the story could still be managed. He said, Ronan, you're exhausted. You're paranoid. This is why you need a team. A team. A cage with a nicer word. Hale whispered, I thought you were my friend. Granger's face softened in a way that felt rehearsed. I am, I said quietly. Friends don't practice fear. Granger's gaze snapped to me then. For the first time, his composure cracked, not into panic, but into contempt. Do you have any idea what he's building? Granger asked me, voice low. Do you know what that pipeline means? You think it's inspection bots. You think it's medical delivery. This is manufacturing at the speed of thought. This is robotics you can print into existence. And you want to talk about friendship. Hale's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Granger looked at him with something that might have been pity. You're naive, he said softly. You built a tool that will be used to hurt people. The only question is whether you're on the side holding it. Hale's face flushed. I'm not selling to defense. Granger's laugh came out thin. You already are. You just don't know it yet. The investors you take, the partners you meet, the supply chain you touch, it's already happening. Hale shook his head, as if rejecting the whole world. No. Granger stepped closer to him. Ronan, you need to accept reality, and if you won't, someone else will accept it for you. The room felt colder. I understood then that Granger's motive might not be money alone. Money was part of it always, but there was something deeper. Ideology twisted around ambition, the belief that he was steering history by force, and in his mind, poisoning a bottle wasn't murder, it was a lever. I said, you can justify anything if you call it strategy. Granger looked at me with quiet disdain. And you can call yourself moral because you solve crimes after they happen. Hale's voice came out raw. Miles, did you do it? Granger didn't answer. That was the answer. But I still needed proof that would hold, not just in Hale's mind, but in the world outside this suite. Accusations without evidence become lawsuits. In Hale's world, lawsuits were another kind of violence. I said, "We're going back to the bar." Granger's eyes narrowed. Why? "Because whoever did this might try again," I said, "and because I want to see what you do when you're near those lockers." Hale looked dizzy, but he nodded. Granger's jaw tightened. "This is absurd." I held his gaze. "Then it should be easy for you." We left the suite together, the three of us moving through the quiet hotel hallway like a procession. Outside, fog pressed against the windows. The garden lights glowed soft gold. Somewhere in the building, a pianist played a slow chord progression designed to soothe. And I felt, with a certainty that made my stomach knot, that we were walking toward a second act. 9. Locker 37. The bar had thinned by the time we arrived. Guests drifted away toward dinners that would be photographed and forgotten. The fire in the fireplace flickered with artificial steadiness. Theo stiffened when he saw us. Lydia's expression tightened when she saw Granger. Hale looked pale. He sat at a table near the lockers, posture tense, as if the chair itself might betray him. Granger stood beside him, hand resting lightly on the back of the chair, a possessive gesture disguised as support. I asked Lydia to open locker 37. She hesitated, then did it. The bottle was still inside. The hotel police had left it there, either through ignorance or through a desire to keep the hotel calm. Evidence mishandled. A familiar story. I didn't touch it. I asked Lydia to remove it and place it on the bar. She did, careful. Granger watched closely. His eyes followed every movement. I took a clean glass from Theo, new, rinsed, untouched. I poured water into it from a sealed bottle and handed it to Hale. "Drink," I said. Hale looked confused. He drank anyway, swallowing quickly as if proving he could. Then I looked at Granger. "I want you to pour," I said. Granger's eyebrows lifted. "Me?" "Yes," I said. "You're the connoisseur. You're the one who noticed something off. Pour a small amount into a clean glass." Theo watched. Lydia watched. Hale watched. The room held a tense hush, the kind of hush that turns ordinary gestures into performances. Granger stared at the bottle for a moment, then picked it up. His hands were steady. He poured a small amount into the glass. Then he set the bottle down, and for a second his eyes flicked toward the locker doors, quick, instinctive. That glance mattered. It wasn't the glance of a man focused on whiskey. It was the glance of a man focused on access. I said, "Taste it." Granger's mouth tightened. "Why?" "Because you're the one who tasted it first," I said. "Repeat it." He looked at Hale as if seeking permission. Hale's voice came out hoarse. "Miles, just do it." Granger lifted the glass, brought it near his nose, inhaled. His face stayed neutral. Then he set it down without sipping. "I don't need to taste it," he said. "It's contaminated." "How do you know?" I asked. He looked at me sharply. "Because you're making a spectacle." "Because you know," I said. He leaned in, voice low. "You're playing a game." I nodded. "Yes." Then I said to Theo, "Bring me the trash bin under the bar." Theo looked startled. Lydia frowned. "Why?" "Because Erin said she found a vial there," I said. "And Theo said he threw it away. But people lie differently when they're scared. Sometimes they hide things close." Theo's face went pale. He didn't move. I said quietly, "Now." Theo disappeared into the back, returned with a small bin. He set it on the floor beside the bar. It looked clean, too clean, recently emptied. I knelt, ran a gloved hand along the inside seam. My fingers touched a thin plastic edge tucked under the liner. I pulled it free, a small, unlabeled vial with a dropper cap. Theo's breath caught. Lydia's hand flew to her mouth. Hale stared, eyes wide. Granger's expression barely shifted, but the air around him changed. A coldness, a slight withdrawal. The moment the controlled narrative collapses, the person controlling it reveals their true face. I held up the vial. "Explain," I said to Granger. He shook his head once, almost amused. "You think you found something?" "I found what Aaron described," I said, "and Theo hid it because you told him to." Granger's eyes flicked toward Theo. Theo looked away, shame flooding his face. Hale stood, voice shaking. "Miles, what is that?" Granger looked at him, and for a moment I saw something like genuine sadness. Not remorse. Regret that Hale wouldn't come along willingly. "It's insurance," Granger said softly. Hale's mouth opened, then closed again. His face looked like a man hearing a language he once spoke fluently and no longer understands. I said, "You didn't want him dead, you wanted him pliable." Granger smiled faintly, and the smile had no warmth. "You don't understand leverage," he said. "I understand poison," I replied. "I understand that you put it where someone would drink." Granger's eyes narrowed. "And I stopped him." Hale whispered. "You stopped him because you planned to." Granger's gaze stayed on Hale now, not on me. "You needed to wake up," Granger said. "You're sitting on a machine that will reshape manufacturing, and you keep telling yourself you can control who uses it. You can't, so I did what you wouldn't. I forced the reality into your mouth." Hale's voice rose, cracked. "You could have killed me." Granger's expression hardened. "I didn't." "You almost did," Hale said. Granger's eyes flashed. "You almost do every day. You run at a speed that breaks people and call it innovation." The bar felt too small. The fire crackled. Outside, fog pressed against glass. Lydia stepped forward, voice tight. "Mr. Granger, I'm calling the police." Granger looked at her with mild contempt. "Call them." He turned toward Hale again. "Ronan, you can still salvage this. You can still do the right thing." Hale's hands clenched into fists. "The right thing according to you." Granger's voice stayed calm. "According to history." I stepped between them slightly, shifting the geometry of the room. Small movements matter when violence is possible. I said, "Who are you texting, the one you called M?" Granger looked at me slowly. "You won't be able to prove anything beyond this." "Try me," I said. He smiled again, and this time the smile carried fatigue. A man who had been rehearsing his justifications for months. "M is Mercer," he said. "Henry Mercer. He represents the investors you pretend you don't need." Hale's face tightened. "Mercer Capital." Granger nodded. "They wanted assurance. They wanted you aligned. They wanted you willing to pivot." Hale whispered, "You were going to sell it." Granger's gaze stayed steady. "I was going to keep it from being stolen by people less careful than us." "Us," Hale repeated, bitter. "You mean you?" Granger's voice sharpened. "You think you're alone in this? You think your morality matters to the market? The market eats morality." Hale took a shaky breath, then said, "Get away from me." Granger's face tightened, something like anger rising. "Ronan." "Get away," Hale said again louder. Granger looked at him for a long moment, then stepped back. Then, with a motion so quick it almost looked casual, he reached into his jacket pocket. My body moved before my mind finished interpreting. I grabbed his wrist and twisted, hard. A small object clattered onto the bar, another vial identical to the first. Granger's eyes flashed and his free hand rose, not to strike but to push. He tried to create space. He tried to regain control. Theo stumbled back. Lydia shouted something I didn't catch. Hale stood frozen, watching his friend become something else. I held Granger's wrist and said quietly, close enough that only he would hear, "You don't get to be the hero twice." His breath came fast now, not fear, annoyance, frustration, the rage of a strategist whose plan had been interrupted by something as crude as force. He whispered, "You think you've won. I think you've revealed yourself," I said. He jerked again, trying to break my grip. His strength surprised me. He wasn't just a finance man. He trained, he prepared. But preparation doesn't matter when the room turns against you. Security arrived. Hotel security, then local police, called by Lydia. A Carmel officer stepped into the bar with a hand on his holster, eyes scanning for danger that didn't belong in his storybook town. Granger stopped struggling. He straightened, smoothed his jacket with his free hand, and put his face back on. the civilized one. He looked at Hale one last time. "I did this for you," he said, voice soft. Hale's eyes filled with something like grief, not for what almost happened, but for what their friendship had been replaced by. "No," Hale said. "You did it for yourself." Granger's face hardened. The officer took him by the arm, pulled him away from the bar, and led him out. The room exhaled. Hale sat down heavily, hands shaking. I stood by the lockers looking at the small doors with their brass names. So much status packed into such small spaces. So much vulnerability hidden behind polished wood. I heard Hale speak softly, almost to himself. I thought Carmel was safe. I looked toward the windows where fog pressed like a curtain. "Safe is a luxury," I said. "People like you make it expensive." He laughed once, hollow. Then he said, "What happens now?" I didn't give him comfort. Comfort makes people stop paying attention. "Now," I said, "you decide whether you're building tools or building weapons, because the world won't ask politely. It'll just take what it can." He stared at the bar's fire, the fake flames flickering. Outside, Carmel's streets lay dark and quiet, the town without streetlights pretending nothing had happened. But inside the hotel, the story had already changed. X, salt, fog, and the aftertaste. By morning, Carmel looked like itself again. Fog thinned. The sky turned a pale, reluctant blue. Ocean Avenue filled with tourists in sunglasses, buying pastries, browsing galleries, taking photos of cottages that looked like fantasy. Dogs raced across the beach, careless and alive. In the hotel lobby, the staff moved with their usual smooth choreography, as if last night had been a brief spill on an expensive carpet. Hale met me for coffee in a corner of the bar where daylight made everything look less dramatic. He looked older than he had the day before. Betrayal does that. It pulls years forward. He asked me, was he going to do it again? "Yes," I said. Hale stared into his cup. "I invited him for a drink." "You invited him into your ritual," I said. "Rituals are entrances." He nodded slowly, absorbing it. He didn't ask me why I'd suspected Granger. He didn't want to hear the mechanics of his own manipulation. People prefer their pain without technical diagrams. Instead, he asked, "Do you think I'm a target because of my company or because of everything around it?" "Both," I said. "Your company is a magnet. Magnets don't choose what sticks." He stared at the lockers behind the bar, the brass names catching light. "I wanted to build something that made the world better," he said. I didn't argue. People need that sentence. It's a kind of prayer. He added, voice quieter, "And now I don't know if I can." I watched him for a moment, then said, "You can, but you'll have to accept that your idea isn't yours anymore, not once it has value." He swallowed hard. "That's what Miles kept saying." "Miles wasn't wrong about the world," I said. "He was wrong about what he had the right to do to you." Hale looked up, eyes tired. "And what do you have the right to do?" The question hung between us, sharp and honest. I answered, "I have the right to notice patterns. I have the right to be unpleasant when unpleasantness keeps someone alive." He nodded, almost grateful. I stood ready to leave. Hale said, "Reyes." I turned. He said, "Thank you." I didn't respond with the kind of polite phrases people expect. Gratitude is a delicate thing in my line of work. It turns into dependency if you let it. Instead, I said, "Change your rituals." He frowned. "Stop putting your comfort behind locks," I said. "Locks make people curious. And stop thinking your friend is the only person who can keep you safe." His gaze lowered. He understood that more than he wanted to. I left the hotel and walked down toward the beach one last time. The sand was cold under my shoes. The air smelled of salt and kelp and the faint sweetness of coastal flowers. The waves came in steady, indifferent. I looked back toward Carmel's clustered roofs, its hidden courtyards, its artful windows. A town built to feel gentle, built to sell the idea that beauty could keep ugliness away. It couldn't. Ugliness travels. It follows money. It follows ambition. It follows the people who believe they can bend the future and remain clean. Back in my car, I drove north. Highway 1 unfurled along cliffs and cypress, past Point Lobos where the ocean slammed rocks with patient violence, past Monterey where the water held the memory of sardines and cannery smoke, past the fields that fed tourists and tech alike. When I reached San Francisco again, the city greeted me with its familiar grit: steep streets, sharp wind, the smell of espresso and exhaust. The skyline looked like a row of teeth. I parked near my office and sat for a moment before getting out. I thought about Locker 37, about brass plates and private rituals, about how easy it had been for someone with a copied key and a clean face to slip poison into a bottle and call it strategy. In my line of work, the story rarely ends with a neat moral, but it ends sometimes with a life continuing, and that was enough for that day. The city's fog rolled in again, softening edges, pretending to be mercy. I knew better. Fog doesn't forgive, it just hides.